And we're live. Welcome back to Casually Hardcore. Here, back with Hanzo. This is Hanzo Part 2. Sorry for the technical difficulties last time. This time, me and Hanzo, we're going to focus our topics and we're going to continue this podcast series. This time, we're going to talk about guild culture. First off, Hanzo, thank you for joining us. How you been, buddy?
Very good, very good. Good to do this again.
And this time, I wanted to focus a little bit more about guild culture and how it shifts over time. So the first thing that you can kind of educate me on, since I didn't play in vanilla, is what was it like running a guild or even being in a guild in vanilla? What would you say would be some of the differences from the past and some things that don't exist now that existed in guilds in vanilla?
Well, running a dungeon sure as hell was a lot harder. So, in the early days of WoW, vanilla, it was a completely different game. Same world, same classes, same spells, but trying to organize things took time and effort. You had to deal with people. You had to actually reach out to strangers and start figuring out, who's a tank, who's a healer, what can you do? Can we do this sunken temple run? Have you ever been to Scholomance? I don't know anything about it. Do you have the key? No, I don't have 10 gold. It takes 3 months just to earn 10 gold. It was extraordinarily grueling in terms of time invested. But if that was your MO, if that you're the type of gamer that can just sit down and just chew through that, it was great. You had to sink in time in those days. You had to put in effort. Long nights just running, looking for people with the key to UBRS. Trying to find people who knew what they were doing for that when Zul'Gurub first opened, who could get, and mostly if you weren't in a guild, you weren't able to run that stuff, so you were relegated to 10-mans or 5-mans. And when I say 10-mans, I mean, in the early vanilla Scholomance, Stratholme, they were actually 10-mans to begin with. UBRS was a 15-man. So that was a challenge. It involved... You had to deal with people. You had to reach out across the net, across Azeroth, and figure out who you could work with. Because by yourself, it was going to become a very, very boring game very quickly. And some of those early stories I remember from folks that played it a little bit. Yeah, not really my game per se. Well, did you join a guild? I mean, what dungeons did you run? You do any PvP? Oh, yeah, no, I just kind of did some quests and stuff. It wasn't for me. Vanilla WoW really wasn't for single playing. It just wasn't in the cards.
Now, going off on that, 40-man raids, the gated dungeons, gated raids, everything was gated.
Yep.
Do you think that because of this, it alienated a lot of players, so that way there was only a tight-knit kind of clique group of players, kind of a niche market? Was WoW guilds a niche at that point?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the gating was, from a game design perspective, it's very ingenious. I mean, it was a very, very solid idea, a simple way to prevent people from stepping into areas that they didn't belong. And this wasn't to try to convey some kind of a message. We don't think you're good enough for this Molten Core raid, so you're not allowed in. That wasn't the intent at all. The intent was, hey, you may have just been kind of wandering around taking in the lay of the land, but you're about to set foot into something that's actually pretty tough. It's not like anything that you've seen thus far. There is no WoW head. Thoughtbot has barely gotten off the ground, and nobody really even knows elitistjerks.com exists. So you're going to step into this Molten Core raid like you have been stepping into Razorfen Downs and thinking you're going to knock it out in a single shot. You're about, to get a wake-up call. So the gating was actually a great idea, and it was there for a very valid reason.
Now, considering that, do you think that guilds back then were more helpful to players, considering that they didn't have any resources except for, other players in their guild?
I think it depended on the type of guild. There certainly were guilds even back in vanilla not trying to raid. Didn't care about it, just cared about PvP. But, in that sense of the word back then, it was very, very rough, world-focused, dishonorable kills in towns, that sort of thing. So people collected of the similar mindset, and if they were raiding, well, yeah, absolutely. We want to raid. We will do whatever we can to reach out, help you learn the ropes, get the tools in place. They had no other choice. They had to train people, get them good at things like Molten Core, or they weren't going to see that content. It wasn't going to be a question of, this stuff's too hard, we need it to be nerfed, we're dying so much. You just improved, or you didn't get to see the content. So those people that felt like they should complain and took to complaining, it fell on deaf ears. Back then, communication was very, very minimum from Blizzard. The game designer of choice at the time was Stigoli, Jeff Kaplan, and he was a hardcore gamer. He'd come from EverQuest. They had been raiding all kinds of stuff, and he wasn't about to put up with any whining. If you couldn't cut the mustard, he wasn't really interested in that. They were fine with the small, focused percentage of people raiding back then. They knew that it was going to be a small crowd.
And this brings me to a topic that I had presented earlier. Was I think that when WoW launched, I think they would have been happy with like 400,000 subscribers. They didn't think they'd break 1 million after a few months.
Yeah.
Considering this, I'm going to ask you this question at each step of every expansion. Now, what mattered more to players in vanilla? Loot, or progression, or community?
Well, see, okay, so this is a tricky question again because it depends on who you ask. I feel like the further the raids were going, the more they realized why they were doing it. They were doing it because they wanted to see the content. They were comfortable in the knowledge that the accomplishment, killing of the bosses, posting of the screenshots, that was the reward in and of itself. So they didn't need to be educated about why loot was there. Yeah, I mean, it was a reward, but more realistically, it was a tool to help them get to that next level. And the truly sharp guilds knew that it really wasn't a question of loot rather. It helped, but loot really didn't make bad players good. Now, as for the broad majority of guilds that were still trying to kind of figure it all out, why are we wiping on Razor Gore, and why can't we progress in Blackwing Lair? Well, they may have had their focus in the wrong spot, putting too much time and effort into trying to farm. Let's go back to Molten Core. It's not working out. We'll go back to Molten Core. We've got to farm more gear. Still not working out. We can't do Blackwing Lair yet. Back to Molten Core again. Well, you're missing the point. You can go back until your whole guild is equipped with Molten Core gear. That's not going to get you past Razor Gore. So there was even then the difficulty of certain guilds really trying to understand the value of loot as a tool to help them progress, not as the actual reward.
Now, let's shift gears to the Burning Crusade. Once again, I have no experience in the Burning Crusade, but what from pretty much every WoW hardcore raider, or even a core raider, would tell me that this was the golden age of raiding, and the golden age of guilds, because guilds that had been around since vanilla had started to get better at the game and started playing. Talk to us about the guild culture in the Burning Crusade, more specifically to a raiding guild.
Definitely, I would say, I would agree with that sentiment about the Golden Age, at least from a hardcore raider's perspective. It absolutely took a lot of what made vanilla great and refined it. And what they were left with was 25-man raiding, which, there are some people that still love 40-mans to this day and will never really, they'll claim to their grave that was really the most epic. And it was. It absolutely was epic. But logistically was a nightmare to administrate. It was very, very difficult. The 25-man guilds in the Burning Crusade really hit a nice balance for hardcore raiding again. Remember that. That's important. Because still, there really was no opportunity for casual raiding. It was Karazhan, it was 10-man. I hate to call it casual because it really wasn't. The trash was very, very tough to deal with. It's just a nightmare. Wonderful instance, don't get me wrong, wonderful instance, very challenging, but a pushover? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not a pushover by any means. Certainly easier than some of the stuff we had to deal with in the 25, Serpentine Cavern and Tempest Keep alone. kept us busy for over a year. And I remember spending some 5+ weeks on Kael'thas Sunstrider alone. So yes, to answer the original question, Golden Age of raiding, absolutely, much more so in the Burning Crusade than it was in vanilla. And of course the population of the game, it skyrocketed by that point up to, I think we were at 7.5 million by the end of the Burning Crusade. So quite a few more people had jumped in.
Now, talk to us about, one of my old guildies told me when he was raiding in Burning Crusade, he basically said you had to get along with your guild, because if you were a dick, they would tell everybody, because the community was still tight-knit. So it wasn't like how people perceive it as today, that you can be a dick in one guild, server transfer, and go to another guild. Is it true that your reputation did matter and that people behaved a little bit better back in those days, since raiding was still a tight niche?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we've had a couple of commenters on my blog say exactly the same thing. That was not my experience on Deathwing at all. I mean, upon reflection, Deathwing has been a pit of misery and shame for many years. And one of the things that I struggled to deal with was losing people to other guilds that would poach for they wouldn't even give it a second thought. Look at this DoD. They're making some headway in Burning Crusade raids. Yeah, we could use a couple of those rogues. Why don't you just go ahead and grab those guys up? It wouldn't even give it a second thought. And from what I've heard, it sounds to me like there have been other servers where if that kind of thing spread, that kind of news spread, those guys would not have any guild at all. So it would have been nice had that been our experience, but sadly that wasn't happening on Deathwing at all. There was poaching all over the place, and I had to deal with it just by trying to come up with a better environment for them.
Now, talk to us about how your guild changed from vanilla to the Burning Crusade, if it changed at all. If so, was it reflective on the community as a whole, or do you think that some of the things that happened in your guild were an isolated incident?
No, I definitely feel like what happened in my guild certainly happened to others, and that was we sloughed off a huge chunk of guild members. We went from 40 to 25, and that was the very first sort of insight into pecking order, right? The people that we had carried for so long through Molten Core, through Blackwing Lair, through Encourage, and a little bit of Nax. Now we see, well, going to kind of trim the fat here. We don't really need you guys anymore. You're not improving. You're not contributing to the culture. And remember, that was important to me in my guild. That didn't necessarily mean it was important to other guilds. Other hardcore raiding guilds, certainly, maybe they made culture important to them, but that didn't seem to be a common thing from what I saw on Deathwing. It seemed to be they could give a shit about culture. They would log in, raid, post pictures of themselves standing in shapes of a penis over the dead body of the bosses, and then log off. That's not any culture I wanted to be a part of, but it kept their motor running. So that's just an opinion from our perspective on Deathwing.
Now, what problems did you have later on in the game that you probably wouldn't have seen running a guild in the Burning Crusade? What were some issues that came up later because of changes to the game or changes to the player base that you had happen that didn't happen during the Burning Crusade?
How far in do you want me to go?
Oh, give us the bullet points. Like, what were some basic problems that you had that in the Burning Crusade, in other expansions, that you would never have seen in Burning Crusade?
The one thing that I think that stands out in my mind, I did blog about this too, was that we did suffer a good chunk of people who would just walk away from 25s in the Burning Crusade that we never really had. That really didn't come up in vanilla. And when we dug a little deeper to try to figure out, like, what's the deal? I mean, you were good, you were solid, you're a good raider, you're doing good deeps, maybe there went to, maybe a little bit of debag there, but otherwise you were okay. Why would you just suddenly walk away? And the answer was, I don't really need to raid to get the gear that I want. You see, in the Burning Crusade, they made a very, very poor decision to visually style all the gear from raiding just like all the gear you could acquire from PvP. Now the stats were different. They had resilience there on your PvP gear, and the standard raid stats is still spell power and things of that nature on your raid gear, but visually it looked the same, and that's really all that matters to the broad majority of folks that don't really care about raiding in the long run. Right? They're not in it for the camaraderie and, yeah, I like the way this is going, I feel good when I get to pat everybody on the back when we do a boss kill. Not really in it for that. Just in it to get the sweet-looking warlock wings that fly off of the helmet. Well, that only takes a couple of weeks in arenas. You don't need to slave 6 months in Black Temple for that. You can just go do arenas. And so they did. I thought they learned their lesson when we got to Wrath, and everything was beautifully separated. Raid gear, Ulduar, Nax, ICC, PvP gear over here. Visually, separate. They looked different. Not just stats, visually. That was important, and that it was a problem that they solved. But as you probably know how this story ends, they repeated their mistake again. They let people in through the back door. I don't really need to be in your 25-man guild. I don't really need to listen to your rules. I can just go get my gear from LFR. So, see you later! And then they were gone. I thought they had learned from TBC, but no.
Now let's talk about Wrath of the Lich King here, because this is where we can really dive deep into what guilds kind of became, and some of the things that I feel shifted in the way people play as a group. I started in Wrath in a guild that had been around since vanilla, and the players were very, very, it was almost like a friends and family guild for the most part that, ballooned. I joined with a bunch of, real life friends of mine, and there were people there that every step of the way they would teach you how to level properly, teach you how to do this properly. They would bring you into raids no matter what your gear was. They said, well, we'll gear them and teach them. We'll train them because we want more people to play with.
Yep.
Talk to us about how that style of guild changed, and talk to us also about the inflated audience of Wrath of the Lich King. Talk to us about what that did to guild structuring and just the fact that, the rise of pug raiding for the most part. Talk to us about the inflated audience and how that affected guild culture.
Yeah, there were a lot of changes in Wrath that kind of facilitated much more openness, much more. They lowered the bar right to accessibility, so it was easier to form guilds. It was easier to get into raids. Raiding itself was not as difficult right out of the gate, if you'll pardon the expression. The difficulty just decreased dramatically across the board. It was clear that this was, some larger design order at work. It was clear that that was the vision they had for Wrath. We have not been doing, I'm speaking for Blizzard here, we've not been doing a very good job with allowing people in to raiding, getting them started with it, and we feel that we could do better, and they did. They definitely did. They lowered the bar, even 25-man rating. By default, the normal modes were just, we cleared the first weekend in Nax, and we're just all stood looking at each other stunned, like, what did we just do here? Is this, like, are we super powerful all of a sudden? Or we've done nothing different. We just, maybe tweaked a few guild rules and refined a few things, but I stood next to one of my longtime officers, Dallins, who'd been there since vanilla, 40-man raids, and we didn't really get it. I mean, this was new raiding, the new face of raiding, and that even extended into 10-man, right? They felt that, people had been kind of wishing for, look, my preference is to be in a small guild, but I'd still really like to be able to see the content. And this is something I've always believed in. I support that decision. If you pay your $15 a month, yeah, you should be able to see the content. You should be able to get the chance to see it. You still need to do a little bit of work. But if your preference is less work rather than more, sure, okay, yeah, 10-man that makes a perfect option, right? And so 10-man's flourished as a result. People could choose to, on their preference, choose to run a smaller guild, run the 10-man stuff. But there was really no argument as to where real rating truly lied. It was still in 25-man. That was where the most challenging content sat. And if there was ever any question, you just turned to how you crafted legendaries. You could only craft Valenier in the 25-man version. You could only craft Shadowmourne in the 25-man. So arguments certainly were starting to emerge during that time. 10's harder, no, 25's harder, blah, 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 back and forth. But the achievements were separate for a reason. Loot was separate for a reason. They still had that mentality, Blizzard did, at that point. Effort versus reward. Little bit of effort, little bit of reward. A lot of effort, a lot of reward. And that's always the way it should have been. So that's why I felt Wrath flourished. It really was the first opportunity for the game, for WoW, to embrace both the casual and the hardcore player.
Now, talk to us about the inflated audience. WoW became pretty much a pop culture sensation. You know, obviously starting in about 2006, 2007 with the South Park episode, but then in Wrath, everybody and their mother was playing World of Warcraft, and even people that had never touched a video game. A lot of people I talked to, this is the first video game I've ever played.
Yep.
Talk to us about what that did to guilds that, because this is just my opinion, and maybe you can, you know, true or false this statement, Hanzo. The hardcore players from Vanilla and Burning Crusade didn't want their special thing known as rating to be shared with just everybody. So they resented anybody new and anybody that wasn't as good as them from the get-go.
True, absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah. And that's very pervasive in gamer culture as well, too. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of topics about that right now, live on Twitter as we speak, about the whole breakdown of gamer culture and how we believe that it's not something that we feel we should share with folks that we don't consider other gamers. You know, it's something we've traditionally held to ourselves, and you know, we just feel like they're taking things away from us by letting the casuals in. This is you know, as an outrage. And you know, originally my stance was with Blizzard. Nothing was being taken away. And, you know, I stood alone in that. There was very, very few people that said, look, everyone, relax, calm down. It's not that big a deal that a whole bunch of people want to enjoy the game alongside us. If they want to do 10s, let them. You know, knock yourself out. We've got our own thing running here, and we're happy to, you know, this was part of my guild culture, we're happy to let people in that want to take it to the next level. We're not going to dumb ourselves down. And I think that there was a good majority of people that just didn't even want to embrace the concept of dumbing down. You know, they had already seen 40s go to 25s and were like, that's it, I'm done with this. You know, they're just catering.
Now, talk to us about what that did to the player base in terms of this kind of resentment, this kind of, you're not in my clique. Like, I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken to that the first thing that comes out of their mouth goes, well, I've been playing since vanilla. Yeah. And it's almost like a badge of honor. Yeah. Talk to us about anybody, how that
conflicts. To ask him if he's been sucking since vanilla.
Well, exactly. Well, let's break this topic into more of like a guild thing. Like if you've got a guild full of players and there's already kind of like a resentment there that you talk about. That's very pervasive. Talk to us about that resentment and what that actually does. Do people click up based off of their experience in the game? Do people who have been playing together since vanilla or have played since vanilla or Burning Crusade, do those people just kind of, it's almost like their sacred bond, kind of like being a Marine almost. Like if you see another Marine, even if you don't know them, you'll side with them over someone else new coming in. What does that do to a guild when you've got players coming from different backgrounds?
Puts a wedge in things, quite frankly. I mean, it's a challenge to try to mediate and keep a solid, stable guild culture, you know, where everyone is aligned on the goal, you know, the end goal, when those individual people that belong to those cliques have different opinions as to, you know, the way the shape of the game should go, and this can even extend past the game into, you know, their opinions on real life. For example, you get a clique of Republicans and a bunch of otherwise Democratic-related players. That raid progression team isn't going to go very far. There's going to be a lot of bickering and yelling. I mean, it doesn't. You know, that's kind of, it's common sense. I mean, so take politics out of that, and now inject anything. People that love sports, people that hate sports. People that are web developers, people that can't check their Gmail account without being helped. You know, when you start mixing people with vastly different points of view on life, and especially self-awareness, which I think is important, you're going to have mixed results. You really need to have a team aligned on the end goal. You all need to be focused, believing the same things. You're there for the same reasons. You're there for the success and the conquest and the journey, not for the loot. And you're there to learn and be, you know, always be improving. You don't carry yourself as I know everything and everybody. Don't tell me how to play. I'm golden. I'll just take care of this myself. You know, cliques form based off of those mentalities. You leave them. You build a large enough guild and leave them alone long enough, you're going to see them form. You'll have a group of people that think everybody else sucks and they are the only ones that are awesome. You'll have a group of people that think they're the only ones that are the good ones in the guild, and all the rest are the bad ones. They're mean or elitist, or they ask me to put the right gems in my gear and I don't like to be told that. It's very, very easy for cliques to form. Very easy.
Now, just closing off the topic on Wrath, true or false, guilds flourished in Wrath both from a community aspect and a rating aspect.
True, absolutely. I think both 10s and 25s saw their greatest apex of shining. They could do what they wanted, really. 10s did what they want, they got their rewards. 25s did what they wanted, they got their rewards. The only caveat to that statement would be maybe starting to get a little bit more vocal on the forums from the 10s. We're kind of not really treated as equals. Don't really know why we can't craft Shadowmourne. Don't know why our $15.99 is worth less than any other's $15.99 a month, which again was a result of the convenience swept under the rug. Those 10-mans were created for a reason. It was a convenience mechanism to let people that didn't want to have to deal with 25-man guilds see the content. They deserve to see the content. They deserved a chance to see the content. Absolutely. But over the course of that whole Wrath expansion, they lost track of why those 10s had been created in the first place. The convenience. See, the convenience went away, and up came entitlement. Why don't we get Shadowmourne? Why are we any less than the 25s just because we choose to be in a smaller guild? And that's what led to Cataclysm.
Now, I'm going to kind of bunch up Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria kind of into one sandwich topic just for the sake of time. We did go into depth about the 10 versus 25 dynamic in Cataclysm, but the one thing I do want to talk about is the declining population that occurred starting in Cataclysm.
Yep.
Talk to us about, from your experience, what players left during Cataclysm? What was their experience? What was their reasons? And how does it affect the game today?
Huge chunk of people, in my opinion, and of course, again, this is not backed by data because we don't get access to Blizzard's data. I think that a huge chunk of people that left Cataclysm were the people that joined in Wrath and saw, and remember, we're excluding guilds from this, not even taking the 10s and 25s into consideration. Huge amount of people that their population ballooned up to during Wrath loved how accessible stuff was. Stuff was not accessible in Cataclysm. Even the 5-man heroics kicked a lot of ass, and they were nice for us. I liked them a lot. I thought that they were great. there's some really, really great Cataclysm 5-man dungeons, and just constantly listening to, "This is too hard. We can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm out." Like, no effort to, maybe you want to look into, do you want to maybe grind out a rep? Why don't you go down to Oldham and grind out a rep and get yourself a ring and stop wearing that blue crap, and then maybe it might not be so hard. Oh, that takes effort, grinding, right? I'm not into that. I came from another era and another magical land where loot showered down from the sky. You know, we had this conversation last time. The heroics in the Burning Crusade, you didn't even get to step into a heroic until you ground out the rep. I'm not talking about grinding out the rep to get a helm or a trinket. I'm talking about you do not set foot in the heroic 5-man dungeon until the rep is ground out. That was the gate. I mean, that set people straight. And the right people were in there. So, yeah, good chunk of people left from Cataclysm that were people that came from Wrath that said, yeah, this isn't really for me. Thanks, though I can't deal with these 5-man heroics. These are too hard. Too hard. Not interested in grinding out rep to get an item that maybe might make me suck a little less.
So, with that being said, guilty as charged. I started in Wrath and quit about a month into Cataclysm. I had a little bit different reasons for quitting. I actually enjoyed the normal 5-mans and things of that nature, but the one thing that I did notice was there used to be a sense of loyalty. When I was playing, leaving a guild was a big decision.
Yep.
In Mists of Pandaria, leaving a guild was like changing what parking space you used at work. Oh, I'll just park up front today, or I'll park here today, or I'll park here today.
Yeah.
I'll go to this restaurant today. Talk to us about why there is no more loyalty amongst players in their guild anymore, and why people... Well, we'll just keep it at that. Why is there no more loyalty towards a guild?
Yeah, there's no loyalty in guilds anymore because there's no reason to be in a guild, right? So they being Blizzard, didn't really put a lot of thought into the ramifications of their design decisions, particularly with things like LFR. You know, a lot of people throw LFR under the bus. I myself like to throw LFR under the bus because it's easy. But in actuality, I think LFR is a good tool. I think it served a great purpose. And yeah, there are people out there that will never be able to participate in a guild of any capacity. They still pay $15 a month. Yeah, they should still get an opportunity to see some content. But for them to say things like, yeah, we're going to allow the same loot to drop, LFR. Yeah, we're just going to make it easier. It's just going to water it down. You'll have to press a button. You know, they didn't. It's almost like we were speaking to a whole new game company. Like, I remember when their games were hard. Warcraft 3 kicked my ass. I mean, their RTS games alone were very, very hard. Very hard. I typically play on normal or expert. I don't like to do the beginner thing, but even on normal and expert, got my ass handed to me. And I want to get back in there. Keep trying and practicing and improving. And for this same company that was so well known to push out these really, actually pretty hard games, it took a little practice. They're pretty in-depth, complex games. For them to say, yeah, we're going to let you take the easy way out. We have high hopes for people to keep 25 mans together. We really, truly believe that they will stick together. That's a load of shit. I mean, it really is. I mean, you can have all the high hopes in the world, but you only need to pick up a couple of basic, like rudimentary sociology books to see how people will always take the easy way out if given the opportunity. You know, and putting the WoW community up on a pedestal, thinking that there's some greater community than any other gaming community, like the Quake or the Counter-Strike community. What drug were they smoking? It's ludicrous. It's pretty self-explanatory, at least to me, why things went the way that they did. And when I read, Ghostcrawler on Twitter now or whatever, reflecting in on it, they kind of feel like, yeah, in hindsight, we really felt like people would rise to the occasion. Well, come on. I mean, all you needed to do was keep the guardrails in place. But I don't think they ever really saw them as guardrails. The explicit design decisions they made with 10s and 25s and gear and bringing 40s down to 25s, all of those, I don't think they ever really saw the guardrails in place. They didn't see how they were actually kind of self-curating the community. They were keeping people that didn't belong in raids out of raids. They were keeping whiners from really gaining a foothold, which these things all eventually happened. For what? We can assume maybe for money. They want to breathe more life into the game. I don't know. Whatever their intentions were, we probably will never know because it's a business decision.
Mm-hmm. Now, very quickly, I wanted to kind of piggyback off LFR and my observations of it. When I first heard of it, considering my schedule at the time, I loved the idea of it, only because of the fact that, okay, well, if I can't get into a raid, I can at least go in, do a little raiding, kick back.
Yep.
My only issue is the type of people that go, I don't know, have you ever been into a Mists of Pandaria LFR?
Have I? Holy Jeez Louise.
It is a cesspool. That is, it's a bigger cesspool than my Call of Duty days. And I was a hardcore Call of Duty player on Xbox 360 of all gaming systems.
Nice. Yeah.
It is the biggest cesspool ever. And the one thing that I can say about LFR is it's one of those tools you have at home that can be used for almost anything, but it's really only good for a couple of things.
Yeah.
It's like using, I can't find the perfect analogy, but that would probably be it. The next few topics that I want to go over is loot, true or false. Griping over loot can kill a guild or lose a lot of players.
Loot kills guilds.
Loot kills guilds. Perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to really keep that in check.
No.
You research all the loot systems that are out there and make sure you use the appropriate one. No,
now, was loot a bigger issue in your guild when epics were scarce, or when loot was given away, i.e. the welfare epics in the dungeons or the LFRs, things of that nature? Yeah,
loot was always an issue. It didn't matter what era it was. Loot was always an issue. It just had the issue was different from era to era. So, for example, in vanilla, the big problem was some people actually didn't really want to raid. The whole point of them being in Molten Core and Blackwing Lair and Encourage was so that they could turn around and go kick ass in Alterac Valley, right? There was no other way to get the most powerful items in the game. So we had to deal with that. We had to deal with people saying, yeah, sorry, I got one of my guildies is watching the stream now. Yeah, sorry, I'm not really interested in taking those bracers. Well, you're next in line, and we got to rotate through. Remember, this isn't about you. This is about the raid progression. Killing Ragnaros like we're working towards. Yeah, not really having it, thanks. I kind of just want a PvP, so I'm just going to really give you a lot of crap. So that was the issue in vanilla, right? Not everybody wanted to be there. And then, of course, we've already talked about the issue in the Burning Crusade. People bitching about gear and then saying, you know what, I'll just leave. I'll just go get my gear out of the arenas. Thanks, though I don't really want to change how I stand and fire for you. So that was that issue.
Now talk about why, and this is just a personal observation of me. People nowadays see themselves through their item level. They value themselves through their item level.
Yeah. Wonder where that came from.
Exactly. Thank you.
Have an eye level of X to queue up for LFR. I wonder why. See, this is just it's a mechanism, right? They put the mechanism in because they didn't have time or couldn't really theory craft out the right way to do it. So they said, Blizzard, okay, let's just go off eye level. I mean, it's a general baseline. It does a pretty good job, but players don't think like Blizzard designers. players think as they always have. They blow things out of proportion. They hyper-focus. Confirmation bias is something all humans deal with outside of WoW. They find what they think they want to hear, and then they focus in on only the evidence that supports their own decisions. So all they need to know is an item level up in the corner of the panel that says, oh, hey, I got to be 496 to do this. Well, you're not 496. You're ass. Well, actually, he could probably raid circles around you, but he's missing one piece. And this is his 20th alt, and he's been raiding all the way through Nax 40 since the dawn of time. But you don't know any of that. All you see is an eye level. It's a side effect of the mechanism they've put into place. You know, that's why they base it that way.
Now, one of my favorite articles that you wrote, because it really hit home in the guild that I ran, was I can't remember what the number of the article was, but it was an article during one of the 10-man teams was complaining about loot, and there was almost like this collusion going on about loot. Describe that situation about what happens when players click up within a guild.
Yeah.
Why does this happen? Well, first off, briefly talk about what actually happened, and talk to us about why this happens.
Okay, so what happened with us was we had a group of I had made a change in the guild in Wrath to start to treat players of different skill levels differently. And I think that this is important and goes beyond WoW. If you ran a business, you'd handle it this way as well. You know, we'd have people that could come and go as they pleased, and we'd have people that were the hardest of hardcore raiders. So the hardest of hardcore raiders, as you might expect, clicked up, and they, outside of the 25-man progression team, they ran 10s. You know, they pushed for their own little mini, you know, unofficial 10-man progression. This was before Guildox even started to recognize 10-man raiding as an actual thing. So they clicked up. They're all of the same mentality, and they get to thinking, you know, we're really the ones that are doing most of the work here. We're really the ones that kind of keep the wheels rolling in this guild, the gears greased. Why do we have to deal with passing along the greatest upgrades to these other raiders? That's useless. That's a waste. I think that we should maybe start, you know, working together towards figuring out if we can maybe find a way to possibly start siphoning some of that top-notch, high-quality loot straight to our own pockets. Because those raiders, those other raiders that don't invest the time, they're not deserving of it. You see, that came about from that click because, you know, I wasn't privy to it. That was their mentality. I wasn't aware. I had a different mentality. I wanted to find a way to bring the two types of player together, to let the raiders and elites flourish. Because hopefully I've outlined this in my guild, I couldn't survive without either. I had to have both the elites and the raiders to make DoD flourish. That was the only way to keep things rolling. But part of that means the raiders that came and earned the DKP, they were able to spend it, and they should have been able to spend it. But the people that were the top-notch players felt that those other lower-class citizens weren't deserving of such loot. So they started to work out a system where, you know, they siphoned that loot to themselves.
Now, let me ask you this question. The fact that you put a literal rank on who was better and who was worse, do you think that possibly maybe same thing with the whole Blizzard item level requirement, do you think that maybe you might have perpetuated that based off of the fact that you actually ranked people based off their skill level?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
mistake?
Absolutely. I feel in hindsight that a number of decisions that I made about that, I didn't have everything squared away. One of which was a very poor choice of label. So keep that under your hat for future reference. Don't give people a title of elite if you don't want them to start acting like, arrogant, obnoxious people that feel like they are the ones that shoulder the weight of the guild. So labeling is very important. You might laugh that off, and I think a lot of people would laugh it off, but what you call things matters. And I think I try to outline that in the blog too, because they started to call 10-mans different things. Ghost Crawler started to come up with a various bunch of different names, or whoever it was, whatever group decision it was at Blizzard, they began to start calling things differently. Whether it was elites or the raids themselves, or heroic versus hard mode versus whatever, people hear those words enough, they begin to believe it. But yes, I absolutely perpetuated it, and I still believe that it is important to acknowledge the star performers. You just have to make sure your loopholes are closed up. And one of those loopholes for me was there was no real punitive cost assigned to first round bids. So the elites were able to first round whatever loot they wanted, and they had tons of loot, tons of DKP and tons of loot. Why? Because they were elite. They raided every week. Every week they raided. Of course they logically had the most DKP, and they sat on it until at which time it was necessary to take the most important items for themselves. I hoped, as Ghost Crawler hoped, that the 25s would just rise to the occasion. I hoped that my message of the guild would kind of spread, and they would just make the right decisions. Yeah, short-sighted. Smart guild leader, don't lean on good intentions. Put the guidelines in place. Prevent them from taking advantage of it. Prevent them from exploiting it. Once you have those loopholes closed, absolutely. Continue to acknowledge the star performers. You never want to treat poor performers and star performers the same. You're going to end up with a guild of nobodies.
And if I were to tell you the story about what happened about my guild, it's literally the exact same story. I had 2 10-man teams that were running normals. One 10-man team that had been around together that I was raid leading, we actually got 5 heroic bosses down in Miss Pandaria in Secret Pokemon. So what happened was some of these players, and it was a couple. It was a guy and his girlfriend. They were both healers.
Off to a good start.
Yep, off to a good start. Now check this out.
Yep.
This is what happened. I'll be very brief. I had gathered, because of the way we were running the guild, we were just running it as a place to play and have fun, but we were going to raid.
Yep.
Once we had such a big group of players we were attracting players from other guilds, just because they didn't have a place to raid. So we went 25-man heroic, and this time instead of just the random loot, because in a 10-man raid the loot gets spread because there's only a certain class can use that, so it wasn't that hard to do loot. Yep. I had decided on doing a loot council, and we breezed through our first 2 heroic bosses. It dropped 6 pieces of loot plus whatever people coined, and the one thing I noticed was the 2 healers that were a couple. They were overgeared and getting outperformed by new people in the guild that I had recruited.
Yeah.
So, judging by 1, what gear they had, and 2, their performance, and 3, the sanctity of the guild, they weren't getting loot off the first 2 bosses. Now, mind you, this is the first week. They didn't get what they felt that they were entitled to get, and they were so mad. They were abysmally mad about the decisions that the Loot Council made, to the point where, and this couple had a lot of friends in the guild. They began to gather up people and go, "You need to tell Marcus that you don't even want to be in the 25-man anymore. You need to tell Marcus that this."
I hand over the guild vault.
Yeah. So why would people come into a community and try to wreck it from the inside? You become a part of a community, the community helps get you. I basically spoon-fed people heroic kills and loot. Why would these people have this sense of wanting to destroy the community from within?
Good question. I don't think that they do it intentionally. I think that many players just go in wanting to play the game, wanting to experience content, learning the ropes, finding out that they need to be a part of a guild, and then they join a guild, and they start raiding, and they realize things are going really well, and then it becomes a little bit more complex about how to distribute loot, and they don't really want to be bothered with all the mechanics. They just know and trust that they'll be treated with dignity and respect like they have been in real life, right? And then they realize when things don't go their way, they're not interested in trying to figure out what the cause of the problem is. You see, I think that a lot of gamers, and this goes far beyond WoW, I think it's just tough on people trying to figure out if they're wrong or if other people are wrong. And you know, this is just one of the grand problems of humanity. The folks that don't realize they don't know enough are too dumb to realize it. I hate to say it that way, but it's a known thing. Right? They call it Dunning-Kruger syndrome, right? You're so checked out, you don't realize how checked out you are. So now put those people, let's just use them as an example, the folks that you had referred to, they're slighted now. Oh, I see how it is. You're going to give these other people these items, these weapons. You're not going to give them to us. Why are we less deserving? You're less deserving because your DPS is in the toilet. And how is that contributing to the larger good? We have to actually go to a forum and spell out a bunch of commandments to people. Thou shalt not suck at DPS. You know, thou shalt not stand in the goddamn fire. These things that you would think are common sense, we spell them out. And then, well, sometimes people get it. Sometimes they, oh, I didn't realize I was supposed to not stand in the fire. I get it now. I get it. I can fix this. And then you have other people. Where do you get off? How dare you tell me how to play my character? I've been playing since vanilla. I know exactly how to play a paladin. Don't you dare tell me I'm less deserving of weapons. Meanwhile, their DPS is in the toilet. And they come up with a bunch of excuses about how the meters aren't an accurate representation of their effort. And if you knew anything about raiding, you wouldn't go off of the meters alone. Well, we're not going off of the meters alone. We're going off of the fact that you're dying a lot. A lot. And for somebody that says they've been playing since vanilla, you probably should check yourself.
Now, to close out the podcast, I want to talk about the straight-up hardcore heroic raiding guilds. And these are guilds that I've had. I had about a month and a half of experience with after I disbanded my guild, and it was quite the experience.
I'll bet.
Now, I don't know how your recruitment process went, but these guilds, I like to call it the epitome of nerdiness because they have an application process. They literally are doing. Now, me being a former peace officer, I went through a background check.
Nice.
They did a more thorough background check on me than a police department did. They wanted to see my parses. They wanted to see this. They wanted to see that. They wanted to know this and know that and know this. They'll put you through a trial period where you get no loot.
Yep.
Now, true or false, heroic raiding is a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that people don't want to hear that.
And talk about guilds that can't fit this model of heroic rating for a business will collapse. True or false?
Over time. Yep.
So they're just unless they take that model, they're pretty much destined to either collapse or just remain whatever they can remain. Now,
absolutely. And you know, let's just address it very quickly. I think that a business is a very short form way to summarize that. But it's not a lot of additional effort. It's just a few extra things, a few things that are done differently that, to be quite honest with you, I'm starting to see those casual 10-man guilds starting to do. Just learn your class, do the research, figure out what spec is appropriate under which circumstance, put in a little bit of effort to improve your gear outside of raids. These things aren't that hard. I have people that reflect on their time in DoD and say, it was a nightmare. He ran it like a business. It was awful. Well, businesses get things done. And they get things done because there's a structure, there's an order in place, and sometimes people need to be directed. You need to be the one to direct them.
Now, I closed out the podcast last time, but due to technical difficulties, I didn't get a chance to present this to you. Do you have any hope for guilds that wish to just be a fun place to play in terms of just getting people in, or do you think that because of the way players are nowadays that it's almost impossible to keep a community together? Do you have hope for guilds that aren't these heroic raiding businesses?
Oh, I absolutely do have hope for guilds, especially with the changes that are proposed in Warlords of Draenor. You know, it really comes down to that similar mindset. People are going to, and I mean, they're really just glorified cliques, right? People are going to continue to gravitate toward what they prefer, their preference of play. And we're going to have guilds that enjoy just taking it super casual, one night a week, just a little bit of tens, and then there are going to be other guilds that are just going to go balls out. They're going to try for server firsts and world firsts. The good news is that now, coming up in Warlords of Draenor, the mechanisms are going to be back in place to keep people accountable and hold people to those ideals. If you're in a hardcore guild, you're not going to be able to take a back door out and say, yeah, sorry, see you later, I'm going to go grab this crap gear out of arenas. You're not going to be able to get the gear from arenas. You're not even going to be able to get tokens out of LFR. You're going to be able to see the content from LFR. And that's awesome. Good. Awesome. That's great. That is a last-ditch effort, which is what LFR always was meant to be, just not handled the right way. So if you have no other recourse, you still would really, really like to see that content, yes, absolutely, LFR will get you in there. You're not going to get tier tokens. You'll be able to put in a little bit more effort, just a little bit more effort. Maybe you'll start to see some tokens. A lot more effort, maybe you'll see even more than that. See, at the end of the day, a lot of people used to crap on vanilla and say, this game is useless. It caters to the hardcore. It only rewards massive amounts of time invested. Well, name something outside of gaming that doesn't. If I picked up a trumpet right now and expected to be an awesome trumpeter with 0 time invested, wouldn't I be considered a fool?
Absolutely, and you're talking to right behind me is a bass guitar, and I've been playing it for 10 years.
Get in there, Rocksmith, all the way.
Oh, absolutely. So to close out the podcast today, we want to let our viewers know that we want you to send us your questions. We want to direct you to Hanzo's blog, 8yearsinazeroth.blogspot.com. And lastly, Hanzo, can you give us a little teaser on your next article?
Next article. Okay, so at this point in the blog, this Thursday, what do we got coming up? So it's July-ish, August of 2010. Still got a few months left before Cataclysm. And I'm trying to decide if it might just be best if I completely cut the 10-man guilds out. So the blog post is going to talk a little bit about that and where my mind's at. And the posts that follow will discuss why I bring it all around, why I come back to embracing the 10s. But this is the point where I'm giving serious consideration to cutting them out, because I feel like having the 10s and the 25s in the guild at the same time is just a recipe for disaster. So that's what's coming up.
And lastly, Hanzo, because of what's been going on recently with a lot of my real-life friends, I'm taking another swing at it. I'm starting a new guild on U.S. Sargeras Alliance.
Nice.
And this time I'm doing recruiting a little bit differently. Instead of just picking up people in trade just to fill the roster, we're focusing more on those players that have a little bit more of a sense of just unity and community.
Yep.
I want to extend the invite to you if you'd like to re-roll an Alliance tune.
Never. But I wish you all the best of luck, and it absolutely can succeed. I guarantee it, with a little bit of time and effort. That's all we're saying. Little bit of effort. Effort. Nobody died from putting in effort. And I think that's the message we're trying to convey here.
Exactly, and I did it once before. I think I could do it again, but the greatest thing is that I learned from my mistakes, and thank you for posting some of your mistakes online, because I'm learning from yours too.
You're welcome.
There's
more mistakes to come.
And I have one last question I forgot to get to, and I think it's an important one. One thing that I learned from a lot of the people that I've been speaking to, WoW is a 10-year-old game.
Mm.
I think the majority of players that picked up World of Warcraft back in 2004 were probably in their college age for the most part.
Yep.
And there was an article that was on WoW Insider that talked about how the WoW players are older, they have kids, they have full-time jobs now.
Mm.
They're either not playing or those players that kind of set the standard for the, I guess, for the community. And you see this now, like baseball players are different now than they were 10 years ago because people that paved the way and things of that nature. Um, is that a true statement? Are the WoW players older? Are those style of players that really appreciated the fun of the game gone?
I think that they still linger here and there, and they know that with a little bit, again, there's that E word, the effort, with a little bit of time and management, they can get it off the ground. You can have a full-time job, you can have kids, you can have a wife. There's mine behind me. I might be an edge case, but there's another part of the blog that I will be covering, very, very quickly, and this is towards the end of 2010, where things get brutally tough on me in real life, and the tables are turned. In the early days of the blog, I neglected my wife and my family for a while, and I regret that to this day. But what's coming up next is the tables are flipped, and I have so much to deal with in real life that it's amazing we made any progression at all. But we did, and I'm going to show you how.
Wow. Well, that should do it for this episode. Thank you so much, Hanzo, and thank you to all your viewers that chimed in.
Very welcome.